Hi there, I'm Paul Wallen and welcome to the Music Producer channel. I've promised some of you that I'll make a tutorial on how to make your chords sound more interesting and even complex in a good way and their progressions. Not those kinds of progressions, which might sometimes sound too shallow and not quite fascinating. Those chords of two regular progressions. Those might sometimes be evenly switching chords with simple triads, and by that I also mean those kinds of short chords and those 2 bar along each chords but still evenly switching triads. Basically, those are all the same, it's just the length of each chord that makes them sound different. Today we're gonna learn something less even and less symmetric and more complex and interestingly sounding when it comes to notes inside of each of those chords. Progressions like that can be implemented in all the modern EDM genres like future bass, future bounce, future house, progressive house and electronica, and all sorts of experimental and compound genres. And overall, there are no stylistic constraints when it comes to implementing them in your drop or breakdown arrangements. Your idea as a chord concept is a primary thing, and the genre as a rule is a pretty secondary aspect because the idea is the thing that's supposed to give you a clue which genre it wants to be represented in. In short, we're about to learn how to, instead of that, come up with something more extraordinary and less mundane, something like this. Last one can sound a bit on the melancholic side. Generally, fast progressions tend to be more energetic and dashing because of the high switching speed of the harmonic steps and the progression itself. But as a good example, that was pretty full and satisfying, but a bit experimental still. And here comes a more mainstream example. In this case, it's almost every time a new step in the bass progression for each note of the melody. This stuff happens and it might take place in more energetic tracks and ideas. So you gotta know how to make those things happen in your music. So here we go, please fasten your seatbelts because we're about to plunge in those 5 steps of writing complex, rich and riveting chord progressions. There will be though a very important and valuable tip number 0. And it is more of a condition than a tip. The sound that you're gonna be using matters a lot. I'm talking about your instruments, patches, presets, which you're going to make those chord progressions with. Make sure to avoid using factory sets of presets from your stock FL Studio synths like Harmor or Citrus or other DAW synths and samplers. It is better to get plugins like Serum, Silent One, Spire, Nexus, or Avenger for that matter, and even better to get some third-party presets for those same VST synthesizers. Preset packs which specialize on your specific genre of electronic music. The thing is, if you wrote a blockbuster of all chord progressions, it's going to sound dull and not that impressive on FL Key's default patch, for instance. It will not inspire you to go further in arranging your track. This is deadly important. Make sure that you follow that advice. Here's one more worthwhile observation. Some producers can build their drops on those fast and uneven chord progressions only, without any melody above it, but it may sound that there is no melody. Actually, there is always a melody in any progression of chords, even in the simplest possible ones of triads. We will get to that later in this video, along with explaining how to build those uneven and complex in a good way chords. Okay, let's for a change step off the default key of C major/A minor and choose here in the helpers menu something less regular, maybe F sharp minor or G sharp minor, as in my case, the most random thing I could possibly come up with. Basically, the piano roll grid, those darker and lighter lines, adjusts itself to our needs automatically and it shouldn't bother or frustrate you. Your root note is in here and you shall not place thy notes on darker lines. That's the basic rule. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, what is a scale, major or minor, what is a key, a chord, and all that stuff, you need to watch this video first. If the hint card doesn't pop up there, I'm just in the process of making that video that will explain everything in music to you. By the way, I just came up with this. Let's just leave the comment with your favorite key that you're using to write your chords and melodies. Obviously, I bet that it is a C major or A minor, but maybe I'm wrong. So let's find out and leave your comment with your favorite key that your piano roll is adjusted to or you make your tracks in. And finally, the very first tip, and that should come as a rule. Although we are talking about complex and cool progressions, don't try to make everything complex from the start. I'm talking about the situations where some producers try to build a chord progression out of already complex and heavily voiced chords. Root note with fifth above, root note again, octave above, then the minor or major third and something like that, and maybe this will sound good, and so on and on and on, and you don't even know that it will sound good by itself, and you will be already lost by the time you try to make the next chord. Of course, what is going to come out will probably turn out to be a satanic symphony. I'm gonna kill myself! Start out with simplest combinations of notes in a chord, and it is a minor or major third. And then and only then, when you've built the whole progression, shall you add more complexities and colors to it. Yeah, start the progression with a root note and the third, major or minor, depends on the key you're working in, above it. It is always the note right above the root note, but skip the lighter step on the piano roll grid, and it is better to raise this third an octave or 2 octaves higher by pressing Ctrl plus up arrow. So the main purpose of bass notes over here is to give the right context for the resulting thing that is happening up here. And correspondingly, the thing up here will serve as a melody, even if it's just a simple progression of triads. This is just how harmony works. The thing here is, even in the most trivial chord progressions, human ear will always be listening to the higher tones and harmonies of each of the chord. As a matter of fact, we will perceive the progression of highest notes in simplest chord progressions as a melody. You might want to run a little experiment to find it out for yourself. Try to listen to a typical plain chord progression, and after you heard it, try to sing out or maybe whistle out the progression. Of course, your abilities as a regular, earth-living human being will not let you voice out all of the notes at the same time in every chord. You will be able to emit just one note at a time, and you bet that those notes that you will intend to hit are going to be the highest notes of the progression. Because your hearing has been paying its most attention to catch those exact notes while listening and memorizing, because it is easier. And that's why the melody in music arrangement is the highest register of sound and instruments. Melody notes run in a quicker and more playful way compared to, chords and bass notes. Nevertheless, you gotta also know that exactly the same melody is going to be having totally different meaning once we've switched the progression of bass notes. By the way, helpful perspective note here, number uno, to treat those bass notes and their switching while progressing as harmony steps. And helpful perspective note number two, you need to know that your musical piece as an idea always has size, and the cycle, it iterates itself through. Probably your cycle of the idea is 4 bars or 8 bars. As a rule, is just always the same, and producers might call it a part, or more fancy, a quadrant. If we were to choose for our cycle length the largest 8-bar loop and zoom in a little bit, we would probably notice some sort of iteration in it once again. Maybe the same patterns of melody, the rhythmic structure of notes may resemble, even if notes are melodically different. Bass note progression may be the same or close to it in those 2 parts. In most cases, you will notice that the idea in the second half is the exact copy of the first 4 bars, but the last 1 or 2 bars of it may differ. Melody-wise, it might differ a lot. Rhythmically, it may be alike because it is still a part of the same idea, but steps might replicate the whole new concept. And also, coming from that same first tip, a couple of more helpful advices. Start out with the tonic step in the bass progression more often. It's just how it is in 80% of songs and ideas. We want to start out from home, and this is home, and use third, minor or major above it when you're just starting to build your melody, because thirds contain more emotions and colors, but it's just not the strict rule, not the rule of thumb, and therefore it's not always the case. Where to go from here melody-wise? Have a guess, and you need to try it out for yourself. Come on, it is your future song. But surely you gotta know, once you've built first 3 steps of the harmony, remember the bass progression steps and the melody to it, your idea will guide you with more ease and flow because your ear will crave for continuation of it further. Your own unique hearing as a set of musical experiences throughout your whole life, whatever tunes and songs you liked and fell in love with, those things have made you who you are today musically speaking. And what melodies you are intend to make in the near future. This feeling will guide you through this process, but the speed of realization of all of that on the piano roll is your experience as a musician and producer. You may lack some of this substance. If it's the case, just keep on trying to progress your chords within the tonality, and after a few attempts you'll be fine, and most likely you will succeed. Keep doing those things until you have 2 bars done. This is at least some milestone. And if your melody is just thirds from those bass notes, do not be discouraged yet. Later on, when your idea will be done for the most part, you can relocate some of the steps a bit up or down and find a sweet spot when it comes to melody notes. And here's the second tip. Your progression has to have a meaning to it. Random things do not work here. The most amusing thing here is you may want to use already working and popular chord progressions, because 90% chance that you are going to end up with one anyway, because there are not an infinite number of cool chord progressions. In fact, there are not so many of them. Popular artists use all the same chords all the time, and they're not gonna sue you or beat you up for using the same chords, because by law, chord progressions and chords are not protected by copyright. And when I said use popular progressions, I meant 3 first harmony steps. If you were to treat those steps like numbers of the key of your tonality, from 1 to 7, here are some combinations of those first 3 chords, which you might start your tune with. 1, 6, 7, 1, 6, 3, 1, 7, 6, 1, 5, 7, 1, 7, 5, 1, 3, 7, 1, 4, 7, and so on and on and on. There is not an infinite number of those, but there are, of course, a bunch more. There are some cases when you could start your tune not with the first tonic step of the key, and there are some working examples like 6, 7, 1, 3, 7, 1, 3, 4, 1, etc. The tip number 3. Trigger your chords not evenly so their length would be somehow different. Ironically enough, but you just gotta try it out for yourself. Try out a couple of those rhythmic patterns within your first 2 bars. For that, you better already figure out what your tempo is going to be, and it is quite helpful to decide on your genre. At least what kind of beat it is going to be. Straight beat, trance, house, techno, hardcore, or maybe breakbeat, dubstep, future bass, drum and bass. If you have a beat at least with some halfway there selected drum samples for the kick and the clap and the snare, that beat playing along with your tune might help you get what you want from the length of each chord and the areas where you want to trigger them. And as I've said, building those first 2 bars is the first milestone for your concept, for your future tune, and by then you will most likely get the idea of what your chord triggering pattern is going to be like for the rest of the part/cycle. In this case, the docking or sidechaining this instrument will come handy to define that beat better. Probably chords themselves are going to be totally different in the next 2 bars, but the structure of triggering each chord and their lengths will probably stay the same. And even that last tip is not the direct guideline, and it's not always the case. Bunch of ideas could work with no repetition whatsoever throughout 4 bars, for example. But at some point you have to have a repetition, because music is all about repetitions and iterations. This is why our brains love it. Otherwise, your tune is going to be quite hard to consume. If you find something good, first thing to try is to place it one more time further down the tune and upgrade it somehow before writing on something totally new. For our brains love repetitions and always crave for it. 4th tip. Those are all sorts of things to make your resulting tune better and more phenomenal. Once your 4-bar part is finished, you just copy it further on. If it sounds monotonous, repetitive, as it almost always is the case, you will need to relocate either melody notes or bass notes along with your melody notes. Or you could only adjust those things at the last 1 or 2 bars of this second part. And as always, should be some variations and breaking of rules, with occasional pattern interrupt or creating some discrepancies in chord length of their rhythmic pattern between those parts. That's just how it works. And remember, once your tune for the most part is done, you may move some of the melody notes up and down to see if it would do any good. Important thing to keep in mind here is if it already sounds good, you better just do some mild enhancements and relocations within it. Once this sounds awesome to you, there is one more great technique to try out. You might want to add some quicker transitions to your existing melody steps, but you better not overdo it, and the tune itself is gonna give you some clues where it might need those enhancements, so you should listen to those things closely. The 5th step is the phase where you can add more voices and notes to that chord progression for it to sound fuller and richer. Easiest thing to do here is just to add some copies of existing notes up an octave, add some fifths to it. And check it out to see if it got better or not. If it got better, and only if this is the case, may you try out the following. Add some new steps from your key. Just going along with the flow of the tune, do not precisely care whether it is a new step in a chord or just a copy of existing note. Try to enhance the harmonical essence of this idea. Yeah, you gotta be careful with this technique, and the main thing to do and to try is to compare this result with the state before and see if it hadn't gotten worse, because there is a chance that those enhancements, those new steps from your key, will make your primary melody weaker. So those are the steps and hints to follow to make an outstanding and unique tune or a chord progression for your next banger track or just a song. If you found that helpful, leave your like, I would love it a ton. Leave your comments below with tutorial topics and what do you want to learn in electronic music production specifically, genres and probably specific issues and things. Do not forget to subscribe, that would be really nice of you. And you know what would be just fascinating? If you would hit that bell. I would go nuts completely. With that, I leave now, and I will see you next time on this channel. For now, bye.